Hello, hello. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Today, we're doing disaster recovery. So this stream is going to be another extension to our series, well, my series that comes after the administration classes, I guess. If you haven't taken any of our administration classes, please check links below. Otherwise, really, I'm going to assume that you have at least taken the administration classes or you have quite a bit of Pi System administration experience. Now, before I get into the topics, feel free to ask questions in the chat. Say hi. I'll be watching the chat. And also, if you're watching the recording afterwards, feel free to ask questions below in the comments and we'll reply to you there. Okay. So what are we doing today? So we're doing Pi System backups and disaster recovery. A little more details. Really, this is today's agenda. We're going to discuss the architecture and where backups fit in to the Pi System. We're going to, well, I'm going to lead you through the architecture that I have to demonstrate backups and also recover from a disaster. Now, after I discuss the architecture, I'm going to do a demonstration on actually backing up the system. So we're going to back up these three components, Pi Data Archive, Asset Framework, and Pi Vision. After we do that, if nothing goes wrong, then we'll end the stream, but something's going to go wrong. So we'll also, after that, take a look at disaster recovery. We're going to take a look at disaster recovery. More accurately, disaster recovery for Pi Data Archive and Asset Framework. After that, we're going to maybe take a look at how we can prevent so much data loss or downtime in the future and implement some strategies to our system. Okay, and another reminder, ask questions as I'm going through, and let's get going with the architecture. So like all of these sessions, I'm really going to assume that we're going to have kind of a basic system. So on the left-hand side, here I'm going to assume I have a distributed control system. And on the right-hand side here, we have a user. So the user wants to see what all the equipment is doing in the distributed control system. So in our architecture here, that's going to annoy me, it's too wonky. That's a little better. Now we have an interface here. We have pi int 01. And well, this is going to have a few components in it. We have pi srv. So pi int 01 has a OPC DA server on it, and also the Pi OPC interface, or the Pi interface for OPC DA. Pi SRV has a Pi Data Archive installed on it. Data Archive, and data flows really like so. The interface pushes data through a buffer to the data archive. So very simple, very similar to previous administration classes. Now, we also have giving the user the ability to see what's going on. We have Pi Web, and Pi Web has Pi Vision installed on it. So the user opens up their browser. There's a browser tab. And the browser connects to Pi Vision. Pi Vision connects to the data archive. and the user sees data. There's a couple more components here. Our Pi SIV here also has Asset Framework installed. And we have another machine here called PySQL, hosting a Microsoft SQL Server with a couple of databases with Pi, FD, and Pi Vision. And these are the backend databases for Asset Framework and Vision. I'll just draw them in green. So these are just SQL connections hosting the backend data for Asset Framework and Vision. There's one last machine we have here. Well, really, it's a little easier if I just copy paste. So we have redundant interfaces, Pi-01 and Pi-02. It's not really not liking copy paste today, is it? And these are redundant interfaces, both reading from the same distributed control system. So these are in a failover configuration. One will be primary and the other will be secondary, and they'll watch each other's status. All right, so there's our data flow. And really these arrows should be pointing the other way. Flowing all the way from the DCS to our user. So in this session, we're talking about how can we make this as reliable as possible, well, in the event of some kind of failure. Daniel, your question, Pi into is redundant. You mean Pi interface? These Pi interfaces are redundant, yes, in the setup that I'm going to go through. All right. So we're going to talk about backup here. What do we actually need to back up in this situation or in this architecture? Well, the first things that we need to back up are our backend databases for Vision and Asset Framework. If those are backed up, then effectively our Asset Framework and Pi Vision are backed up. That's really the only configuration we have, apart from maybe some website configuration on Pi Vision. So a combination, well, if we're talking about Vision backups, a combination of backing up the backend database for Pi Vision, as well as normal Windows backups on the Pi Vision server should be right. Now I'm going to demonstrate this in a little bit. But really more importantly, especially in this session, is backing up the data archive. A little more information on what the data archive actually contains. So there's a bunch of configuration files and little internal databases. And then there's archives containing data, time series data coming from our control system. So all of this stuff needs to be backed up. So what we'll do in our demo is we have another server down here. This is actually called Pi DC. And we're going to back this up down here. I'm going to leave our A behind. So all these files are going to be moved off into this Pi DC in a little directory here. We're going to set up a nightly task to do this. And yeah, then we'll pray that nothing goes wrong. So we'll do this. I'll go through each of these steps, and then we'll come back here and kind of summarize. All right. So what do we got here? So this is our system as we see it right now. Here I'm on Pi SRV. This is our data archive and asset framework server. Here is Pi Web. This is our Pi Vision server. It's actually got a browser open within the Vision server, and we can see data's flowing through. So our system's working right now. All right. The first thing I'll go through is backing up Asset Framework and Pi Vision. There's not really too much to say about this. If you're going to back these up, well, you should have some kind of scheduled task where, and probably handled by your IT department, that will back up any SQL database on this machine. So these will be backed up, differential nightly backups, that they'll have some kind of backup strategy in place. Just for fun, I'm going to do it now. So an example of backing up these SQL databases, I'm on PySQL here. Generally, this will be scripted if you're in production, but this is really how you do it with SQL Management Studio. We can see in PySQL, we've got two databases here, PyFD and PyVision. And to do a backup, I'd right-click on it, go Tasks, go Back Up. I would probably add multiple locations in here and back up. This will create a backup of the database, and essentially now I can restore it if I want to. Vision, similarly, tasks, backup. Okay. No, doesn't like me. Anyway, we're not going to troubleshoot that here. Really, the focus of this is on the Pi Data Archive backups. In the administration classes, I don't spend too much time going through this. This is sort of an assumption that your IT department will handle this and have some kind of strategy in place. We're going to move on to the real stuff, well, the stuff that we care more about here, which is backing up the data archive. So we're going to move on to Pi SRV. So what I'm going to do here is first let's check out what's happening already in our backups. To check out what's happening in backup wise on your Pi Data Archive, you go into Operation inside System Management Tools and into Backups. The screen's going a bit strange. There we go. That's a bit better. No, it isn't. Oh, ignore the black bits. All right. Let's see. So we've got a backup that happened during 2020. I think that's 6th of January. Depending on date format. But right now it's 2022. This is something I definitely don't want to see if I look in a production system somewhere. We want to see successful backups running through. And this is something that you should check as a Pi system administrator to make sure backups are happening on a regular basis. So I'm going to run some commands here to, first off, to do a full copy backup over to a remote server, and then to make a scheduled task to initiate a incremental backup every evening after that. So we do this through, well, the easiest way to do it is through command prompt. We're going to open a command prompt here, and we're going to go to forgot my CD. There we go. There's our Pi directory. We're in the administration folder. And to initiate the first backup, I'm going to use PyARTool and back it up to a specific directory. So this is going to be a network share. I'm going to back it up to a remote place. I just remembered, it skipped my mind to actually give the PyData archive access to this remote place. Let's give it access first, otherwise this is just going to fail. So when we initiate a Pi backup, there is a specific subsystem, a specific service on the PyData archive that does the backing up. So I've opened services here. The Pi backup subsystem, I'm seeing what account it's running under. This is NT-service Pi backup. This is a local account on under the machine account on this computer. I need to give this access to the directory I want to back up to. I'm going to move over to PyDC, which is going to act as my file server in this case. There's a folder I've made here called backup storage. It's completely empty right now. I'm going to give this backup service access to it. So again, this is a step probably done by your IT department. We're going to give this specific service permission to read-write. I'll add it in here. So I'm looking for the machine account in this case. PySRV, there we go. And I want to give it full control. Okay. We should be good now. So I'm going to initiate a backup to PyDC backup storage, and then a folder for my backup with the flag arcdir. So I want to back up the archive directory as well. Okay, so a backup task was successfully started. So let's see what's happening. When you initiate a backup with the command prompt, you don't see anything in system management tools. Really, the best way to see what's happening is we'll go over to PyDC, go into backup storage, and I've got this PySRV folder in here now. This is the folder that's being written to with my backup. The rule of thumb is if there's a pre-commit folder still here, the backup's still running. So this will probably take a few minutes, and then it'll print out a log here. We can kind of see the files that it's doing, maybe in the pre-commit folder. Yeah, it's copying the archives. And we'll wait for that to finish. While we are, I'm going to move the hideous black bars up the top of my image. There we go. Isn't that better? That was bothering everyone, wasn't it? rather than just wait for that to complete, let's create our scheduled backup now. That'll just churn away in the background. So how we make a scheduled backup is we're running PyBackup. PyBackup.bat is a script in the ADM folder. We're giving it the file path again. PyDC, in my case, it is PyDC backup storage, and inside PySIV with the install command. This will install a scheduled task that will perform an incremental backup every evening at 3:15, every morning at 3:15 a.m. by default. Okay, so that's been created now. We can go and check that if we want to. We're going to go into Task Scheduler. And we have PyServer backup at 3:15 a.m. every day. There we go. So I'm pretty happy about that. And our backup's finished. So here it is. That's our copy backup. Now, we don't see a log file here. Copy backups will not give you one. I'm going to do an incremental backup now as well. So I'm going to manually trigger this on the PyData archive server. This, there we go. Pre-commit. Oh, we did get a log. We'll check out the log a little more when this incremental backup finishes. It should be pretty quick because it's already backed up everything except for the archive. If anyone has any more questions, feel free to shoot them through. All right. Okay. So let's see. I just refreshed our backup list here in our system management tools, and I see that we have a backup that's been completed. And very shortly, we should have another one. There we go. Our incremental backup as well. So now we should be able to go over to our data archive, our PyDC. And here we go. We've actually got an error here. Let's see. So the log that got printed out, we'll open it in Notepad. What's your error backup? Okay, I tried to back up AF, but it could not. It's not been configured to. That's okay in our case. Really, and I said this in the previous administration courses, asset framework backups really should be done using your corporate standards for SQL Server backups. But if you've got time right at the end of the stream, I might go back and fix this, but it's not really important to us now. Otherwise, apart from backing up the AF data, yeah, it was all successful. Okay. So we've done our backup. We've effectively moved our data archive off. We've talked about strategies to back up the SQL databases and move them off as well. Now, right now, all our production files are in PySRV, and all of our backup files are in PyDC. We've got a single backup of all of our data. Do you think that's good enough for a production system? Well, Daniel asks, do you have a backup procedure? We're sort of going to talk about it now. Is this really good enough for a production system? Well, is this good enough for any system nowadays to have a backup of all that data on a file share that the server being backed up to has access to? So Daniel asks, or a document with steps. Yeah, there down below, I've linked a bunch of documentation on backups. If I have not, I'll go back and link more of it after the stream ends. So there's the PyData Archive user manual is your best place to find documentation, and that is linked below, and that'll have best practices and procedures. So what I'm getting at here, just copying all that stuff off and having an incremental backup generally will not be good enough, I guess, for a couple of reasons. Well, number one, you've only got one extra copy. Really, you should have several. But the more important reason nowadays is really because of cyber attack. If the data archive has access to the backup and it is always backing up to here, it has permission to change it. Therefore, if it gets somehow compromised, your backup is also compromised because it has permission to access it. I guess another reason would be if someone, well, if an administrator caused a breaking change on the data archive, no one noticed until that evening when the data archive was backed up. You wouldn't be able to roll back unless you had some kind of incremental backup of these files over here. So a common question is, so why use the backup procedures at all? Why don't we just have VM snapshots of our PySRV or use any kind of other backup software? Really, the reason to use this method of backing up is that it guarantees that the files that you've backed up, you can use to recover. So they're not corrupted, and it gives you just the right files for you to recover very quickly. All right. Now, we've gone over backup. So one more question's come in. If you're using full VM backups with IDPA, should we be doing another separate that backs up the files? Best practice, yes. So if you take a VM snapshot, or if you use any kind of other backup strategy, when you recover from that, either recovering from the snapshot or using any other kind of method of recovery, that there's no guarantee that the files will not be corrupted. So all of the PyData archive files are constantly being written to. So best practice is use this method along with your other strategies. Okay. So let's say, for example, your data archive catches fire. So we're going to go through our disaster now. So this is fine. This is fine. I'm okay with the events that are unfolding currently. It's okay. Things are going to be okay. We've got our backup. So our PyData archive now is going to be going down. There we go. So PyData archive is going to be going down. We'll take a look at how to recover from that backup. Okay. Apparently it overheated, so it shut down. Right. Okay. Here's the state of play now. Our Pi server caught fire. It's gone. So what happens? Okay. Right now, our interfaces should be buffering. And our user, well, we can actually see what Pi Vision is doing right now. It's not going to be very happy. Our user sees this. So not even any flat lines, because Vision can't connect to the data archive at all. The user will see nothing and see some errors come up. So our user is pretty unhappy. Our interfaces are still buffering our data though. Let's make sure they're buffering our data. So one thing that I would check if something like this happens is on my interface machine, I would go in and check that they are buffering. So I'm on the interface machine now. ICU is actually going to fail to load because the data archive is no longer there. That should be okay for us though. We just want to get into the buffering utility. There we go. So our interface buffer queue is going up. This is what we want to see. Our data archive is gone. Our interfaces are still grabbing data from our DCS. They're still buffering data. And just for fun, while we're running through this, I might open the log. We'll see some interesting messages later. So what's our strategy here? There's a few different ways to do this, to recover, depending on what you have and what your plans are. There's some articles underneath. I'm going to use kind of a combination of a few different articles and a few different procedures here. I want to display how to recover from something like this, and I don't want everything to go to plan. I mean, I could just have a canned system that is fully prepared and will just take over instantly, but that's not real life. So I'm going to restore using some best practices and some not very best practices, and then show you how to fix things as we go. So this is the strategy that I'm going to use. We're going to have a new machine here called Pi SRV01. So note that this is called Pi SRV01, not Pi SRV. It's a completely different machine with a different name. We're going to install a data archive on it. The same version of data archive that was, no one saw that, that was on our Pi SRV. and then we're going to recover our backups to it. So while we're at it, I'm going to install Asset Framework on this as well. After we've done our installations, we're going to restore our backup, which really is a case of copying and pasting the files back onto our machine. And then, after all this, after we've confirmed that it's all working again, we're going to rename it to PySRV, and suddenly our interface will go, Pi's back. I love Pi. And then it's going to connect again. So our interfaces are going to start working again, and our vision is going to discover, Pi's back, and then send data back to our user, and our user will be happy again. Is everything going to go well? Well, no, but we'll see as we go. So our first few steps here are to install Data Archive and Asset Framework onto our new PySRV 01. So let's go and do that. This is PySRV 01. PySRV is gone, so goodbye. All right. This is PySRV 01. We're going to install Pi on here. So I've got the installation kits in a shared folder here. This is the version that was installed on my old Pi server. And we're going to run it. And especially as we're going through this installation, there's going to be a bit of downtime. So any questions, feel free to fire them up. Okay. This is just a test system. I'm not going to participate in the program. Okay, so we're going to install Data Archive and Asset Framework server, and really I'm going to install the same features that were installed on my old one. It did have analysis service installed on it. However, this should be fine for us. Maybe we'll go individual features. I'm not going to install the RTQP engine, if I can find it. For our server specs, the RTQP engine was really not suitable for our old machine, and really isn't suitable for PySRV 01 either. Really, you shouldn't install and enable the RTQP engine if you're installing Asset Framework and Data Archive on the same machine. And generally, best practice is you should never install PyData Archive and AF on the same machine. Our old system had them both installed on the same machine, so we'll continue here. A little later, I'll move Asset Framework off and show you how to do that. Okay, but for now, we'll install it using the same features that we had previously. Now, installation directory and PyData Archive directory. We're going to change the drives here. Best practice is we install Data Archive on a separate physical drive to our operating system. So our E drive and F drive. E drive has 38 gigs free, F drive has 48 gigs free. Makes sense to put our PyData Archive files on E drive and archives on F drive. So we're going to do that. So these are all going on E drive. I'm happy with that. Our SQL Server connection. Now, we already have a SQL Server database, and that is on PySQL, the default instance, we do not need to run the scripts because they've already been run. It's already up and running. We just need to tell this new server that its backend asset framework database is PySQL. So in this point, we're telling it when it's time, asset framework, you connect here. Okay. And it's already selected F drive as our archive drive, which is fantastic. It was F, yes it was. And Qs, they can go on E drive. Great. And I already have a license here. When you're doing this, you'll most likely need to generate a new license. The quickest way to do that and get approvals all done, if you are in this kind of situation where you're recovering from a disaster, I forgot to mention right at the start, call tech support. So call our tech support right at the beginning. We'll walk you through and we'll be able to help you get a new license very quickly so you can get back online. But I already have one here. If you're interested in generating a license and how to do that, it's in the administration courses linked down below. Okay. Apart from that, I'm pretty happy. I'll go next. And I'm happy with these default service names. Really, we should have service accounts for these, but this is a disaster. I'm recovering from it as quickly as we possibly can. So there we go. That's our excuse anyway. All right, we're happy. We can install. Now, so far, I've made one mistake. Well, sort of a mistake. The directories that I selected to install everything into, E drive and F drive, those drives didn't actually exist on our previous PySRV machine. When I restore the old Pi server onto this after installing it, it will look for archives and files in places that no longer exist. So it's going to not be very happy. If you want to get up and running as quickly as possible, it's easiest if you have a machine. If this machine had exactly the same drive setup as my old PySRV machine, if it did, and I installed with the same file paths and everything, it would just work. The restoration will be a lot smoother. Here, I'm going to have to go through some extra steps to make sure it knows where all of its files are. All right. If you're not sure where those files are, well, where the files are meant to be, you can actually see in the backup log. So if I open my log again, I can see, there we go. So these are the locations of all my files back on PySRV. They're all in C drive program files, it looks like. And the archives, there we go. So my archives are actually in C drive py/archives. But when I installed Pi here, these are, I've said the archives are somewhere different. But Daniel, you've got a question. You've got problems with visualization of data. Every time the power goes out, you can no longer visualize the data and I have to restart some services on the server. Why does this happen? So you're saying if the power's gone out, if the data archive has had a ungraceful shutdown, well, the power's been cut and then it started up again. Data doesn't flow properly. Is that what you're saying? This installation is going to take a little while, so anyone have any more questions, go for it. What's our interface doing? All right, it's just complaining that PySRV is no longer there. And just for fun, I'll open up the log on the second interface too, just while we're waiting for Pi to finish being installed. All right, our second interface's buffer queue is also piling up. And we'll keep an eye on the log as we go. So it looks like data archive is slowly starting up. Let's talk about the issues that are going to happen. So when we recover our data archive, the thing that it's going to be most upset about is it can't find its primary archive. So we're going to copy these over. Copy them to where we want them. These are all the configuration files and also the archive files. We're going to copy the archive files to where we ultimately want them. So that's our archive directory that we said that was on E drive. And when it starts up, it's not going to know where its archives are, because one of these configuration files tells it where its archive files are, and it'll be looking at the old locations back for PySRV. We're going to tell it where the new ones are. So to do that, we're going to give it a new archive registry. We're going to tell it where its new primary archive is, and then we're going to register all the other archives manually. Okay. So we've got our first error. Analysis service can't start because a connection couldn't be opened on the selected AF server. Okay. Looks like this connection here between a new AF server and the SQL server is not working. Now, this is most likely because our SQL server is configured to let PySRV in, but not PySRV01. Okay, install failed, but that's the reason why it failed. We're going to go and let it in. So we're going to go to PySQL. And, well, generally there's a few different ways that the backend SQL database will control letting services in. Really, it's the securer of these databases themselves, but most of the time it'll be in local users and groups. This SQL machine has a local group called AF Service, and the account running the AF Server service has to be in this group for it to access it properly. So right now it has PySRV in that group. We need to also, well, we need to put PySRV01 in there for it to start working. So I'm going to add a computer PySRV01. Okay, I may as well remove PySRV. It's gone now. Okay, now if we go back to our PySRV01, it was complaining that the analysis service wouldn't start before. Now we'll load up Pi System Explorer, confirm that Asset Framework actually works. And then we'll start analysis service. Okay. When we open up Pi System Explorer, it's complaining that the server at the address that we're trying to look at actually calls itself PySRV. That's because in our SQL database, the name of the AF server is PySRV. That's actually okay with us. That's fine. And it should still work. Okay. We're connected. It's happy. So it looks like this Asset Framework database has a development database, a database called pumps. There we go. So it's working. Great. We've got Asset Framework back. We should now be able to start the analysis service. Did we not install because we couldn't start? I'm actually not sure. Let's try and install it again. So if you haven't run the installer again on a machine with Pi already installed on it, it'll ask you how you want to change the installation. And we'll say we want to add the analysis service. So maybe we want to modify individual feed. Oh, here we go. Analysis service. It looks like because it couldn't start it, it rolled back and removed it. So we're just going to add it again. Okay. Should be happy now. All right. Let's take a look at our PyData archive. So this is a freshly installed PyData archive. This should work with no problems. It'll just be empty. There's nothing in it. Wonder if it's going to complain because I'm trying to install it and opening it at the same time. We'll see. Okay, so there's nothing much in this server. There'll be no points. It's completely fresh. If I look at archives, it should have one archive. Yep, the one it creates by default when you install the server. And at least I can see that archive and I can see some message logs from when it started up. Great. It's good enough for me. Let's do our restoration. So let's restore what the state of our PySRV was to this new PySRV01 server. Okay, at least that one's happy now. All right. So there's a few steps here. The steps to do this restoration I've linked down below as well. First thing we're going to do is stop the data archive. So I'm going to go into our data archive files. No worries, Brenton. Thanks for joining us. That was in eDrive. And PySRV stop will stop our data archive services. So we're stopping data archive. Here's our steps. We stop the data archive. We copy over the restored files. And then we start it again. Now, when we do start it, it's going to complain loudly because of that. It can't find its archives issue that I explained before. But let's see what happens. So these backup files here, there's all these files here. We're going to take a look at what it looks like in our local PyData archive. So this is our backup on the left-hand side, and this is our local PyData archive on the right-hand side. It's got some very similar file names. So really, to restore, all you do is get your backed up files. I'm going to copy the relevant ones here and then paste them and overwrite them in our new PyData archive. Okay, there we go. Now, for these ones, arc and arc future, we're going to go to our archive directories inside Py. There's arc. I'll copy these in here. And then I'll copy my future ones into future. So really, we're just copying these where we want them to end up. Once that copy is complete, we can start our data archive again. And another note, there was, well, our AF backup failed before, so this is probably empty. Yeah, there was no need to restore AF. Our asset framework database was on a separate machine on PySQL. It was never in trouble. Okay. It's starting up. Let's see what our message logs say. It's going to be very angry with us. So angry it can't even find any messages. I expected to see a lot of errors here. Let's go backwards in time. The messages are quite upset. Let's see what's happening in other subsystems. Now, this is what happens when you rehearse slightly differently than you do it on the day. I'm pretty sure in my rehearsal, I didn't change the C drive. We may need to reinstall the PyData archive again. That's unfortunate. I threw too many spanners in my works. I'm trying to think of a way I can do it without having to reinstall. Ideas from the audience are welcome. Let's see if it's just system management tools that didn't like it. We're all running. Ah, okay. Wasn't as bad as I thought. All right. I threw an appropriate amount of spanners in my works. All right, here we go. So I just needed to restart system management tools. It was kind of upset with me before. Okay. So when we started the server up, I'm just going to sort by error instead of debug. Here we go. So these are the errors that we'll see because when we moved the archives over, we didn't move them to the same place that it expected them to be. And here we go. It's saying it can't find them. If we go into archives on this machine, well, let's check that all of our tags are back. So all the tags that were present on our old data archive are here. That's great. But if I look inside archives, it's in trouble. We see no archives at all. Now, this is something that you never want to see. We don't even have a primary archive that's being written to. And none of the archives we moved over are registered. So, and it won't even let us register an archive. So when Pi can't find its primary archive, it goes into kind of a emergency mode where it goes, oh, something's very, very wrong. And it doesn't accept any new data, and it sits there waiting for you to fix it. So we're going to fix it now. We're going to tell it where its new primary archive is. So PySV stop. To mess around with the archive registry, we need to make sure the data archive server is stopped. And then we run a command to tell it where its new archive is. To do that, I'll need another command prompt. There we go. We're going on Pi server. We're going in our ADM directory. The command that we want to run is pidiag. This is the diagnostics tool minus AR, which rebuilds the archive registry. Now, never run this command in a production system, really, unless you're on the phone to tech support and they're telling you to do it. Where our system's already broken, where we want to completely rebuild the archive registry and then register our new ones, because it wasn't possible to move them into the same directories as before. So I'm running it. It warns us to only do this if we know what we're doing. So we want the full name of the primary archive file. Which one is our primary? So inside archive, it's the one, so it's not the one that was just created. So it won't be the one, where are we? I should have removed the other archive. It's these smaller ones. So this one is the one that was created when we installed Pi just now. Yeah, 2022, 25th the 8th. That is today. I'm going to remove this one. We don't want that one anymore. That was, I just deleted it. That was the one that was created when we installed the server. It's full of nothing. These ones are the ones we restored, and I'm looking for the most recent one. So this is 2021, 16th of the 4th. This is the one. I'm going to shift right click, copy as path, and paste it in here. Now, it does not like double quotes, and that should be good. Double check, that's our primary. Yep, okay. This is correct. I wish to proceed. You get a lot of warnings. Again, don't do it on a system that's currently working. You only ever do this if it doesn't know where its archives are, and you want to tell it what its new primary archive is. The other downside of this is that it will unregister all the other archives that are currently registered. And if your interfaces are writing to the server right now, then you'll lose all the data that the interfaces are writing if they are before your current primary. This is not something you do unless you know exactly what's going on. In our circumstance, none of our interfaces are writing to our machine because it's still called Pi SRv01, and the interfaces are waiting for a machine called Pi SRv to come back. Okay, so that's back. We can start our server again. So we're going to run a Pi SRv start. Whoop, that was site start. That didn't do anything. Pi SRv start. And we'll need to restart SMT, otherwise it'll get very upset with us again. And when that comes back, we should see a single archive in our archive list. Okay. Yeah, it's back. At least enough to open SMT. So operation archives, and we're back. Okay, so to register the rest of our archives, we just register them with the register and archive tool. If you have a lot of archives to do, it's probably more efficient to do this with the command line. But we can select the ones we want to register. So we've already got that one in. I can register these two, holding down Control and selecting both. Oh. I selected the annotation files. So I selected the annotation files instead of the actual archives, but it'll be more happy with me this time. There we go. All right, now I want the rest of them, which is the future ones. You can just select all the files and it'll just complain about the annotations, which is fine. Now our future ones are back as well. So we're all completely back now. If we want to, we can check some old data. So maybe I go into Archive Editor. Let's check. There should be a pressure tag. Yeah, pump to oil pressure. There we go. So here's the last 2 hours of data. Looks like we were back up and running before 2 hours were up. So it's 6:13 a.m. now on this machine. The last time it got data, the last time it has data in the archive is 5:11, which is when we did our backup. Well, it should be. Yeah, 5:22. 23. It'll be when we did our backup. Okay. So, what's happening now? We're all up and running, really. We've got our new data archive in place. We've got it's up and running and it's fine. Asset framework is working. Everything is working. Now, our interface is still buffering and our user is still unhappy because it can't access data. I should probably stop referring to the users as it, but you know, habit. All right. To fix this, we're going to rename our PySRV 01 to PySRV. Our interfaces operate on machine name, so our interfaces are set up to connect to a machine called PySRV. So they'll start sending data as soon as we get that back up online. So to do the rename, really this is where you would work with your IT department and they would lead you on the best way to do this and get DNS working and get everything working again. I'm going to do it here. I'm going to really delete the old machine account for PySRV, rename PySRV1 to PySRV, and then fix up DNS myself. So this is generally something your IT department will do. I'm going to do it here. So my domain controller, it won't let me rename the machine until if there's already a machine account called PySRV. So PySRV is dead now. I'm just going to remove this account. So these are tasks that your IT will perform. I'm going to delete PySRV. Yeah, it's gone. Now on PySRV 01, I close down everything. And then I'm going to rename it to PySRV. So I'm going to go into this PC and go properties. and change the machine name to PySRV. Okay. So it says I need to restart. So I'm going to restart. Now, I might see if I can get DNS to give it the proper IP address before I restart. There's more IT stuff, but so we're looking for, we'll see what IP address it gives it. PySRV is looking for that address. Maybe PySRV 01. I'll set it to the same address as well. Let's see. Oops. That was PyInter 1. That was not good. No one saw that. PySRV 01. Okay. We'll see if this helps. It probably won't. So PySRV 01 is being restarted. It's going to come back as PySRV. So we might need to mess around with the DNS a little bit, but we're going to, once we do that, PyInt will rediscover it and just flow the data through. So I'm going to go onto my interface, see what's happening. Still can't connect. Let's see if our reboot is finished. It's still coming back up. Okay. PySRV 01's coming back up. I think my DNS fumbling may have not been successful. Yeah, it's still 010. That's fine. We'll mess around with it in another way. So all of this stuff that I've been doing the last few minutes, your IT department's going to be doing it. But essentially, I renamed PySRV 01 to PySRV, and I'm trying to get the interface to recognize that that has happened. Okay. It still thinks PySRV is at the old address. My brain's misfiring. Can't remember the command to flush the DNS in Windows. Oh, it is ipconfig. All right. Okay, now it's getting the right one. Okay, this should flush through when it next checks. Should check every couple of minutes. Looks like it's checking every 10 minutes. Let's do the same for Pi Inno2. And at some point, one of these is going to flush through. And we'll be back online. Oh, here we go. It's green again. 0 events in queue. Would you look at that? Okay. Can't reach the synchronization file. That's a different issue. Looks like it's flushed through. If we go to our Pi Web, we should be able to do the same thing here. Now, all of this DNS stuff and IP stuff, generally your IT department should be able to sort this out. There's probably a more efficient way of doing it than I've done in this class, but there we go. So that's flushed. We should be able to refresh, and this may come back. There we go. Okay, and look, all the data is back for the last 10 minutes at least. Okay, look, so we've got a data gap here, about 10 minutes worth. That was, so right here, this is where we made the backup. And we've got a data gap until, let's make this 20 minutes maybe. So here is where we made the backup. And here is where the system went down. So between this time, we have data loss. Not perfect, but because we completed the backup, then our system went down only a few minutes later, we didn't lose much. And everything the interfaces did while the system was down, it saved. If we had an interface like the OPC HDA interface, an interface that supports history recovery, we could go back and recover that history now, and we'd get no data loss at all. We would just get downtime for users. Okay. All right, so sorry about all of that DNS and IP messing around. It's just because of the training system that I'm using isn't really optimized for what I was doing, but our users are now happy. They can see data again, or maybe they're mildly happy because they can see a data gap somewhere in the data. And our interface all flowed through, and it is now flowing through to our data archive. Okay. Pretty happy. Now, if anyone has further questions, please type them in. But I'll go over some things we really could do to enhance this. One thing that makes this a lot more clunky is our asset framework is on the same machine as our data archive. Best practice is to not have these on the same machine. So really, we should have a separate machine. Here I have a machine called Pi AF. So this AF service really should be moved onto this Pi AF machine, as well as analytics and its associated services. And we would have actually got no downtime at all if we had a collective. So if we had Pi SRV 02 with a data archive on it, which already had all of the archives replicated there, we'd get no downtime for users. Pi Vision would have failed over and connected to our secondary machine. And our interfaces would have been sending it data this entire time. And also to recover from our backup would have been even easier. We could have recovered from the files on Pi SRV02. So let's set this up. I'm going to move first I'm going to set up this collective because it's the easiest thing to do. And then I'm going to move Asset Framework off, and we'll kind of talk about repercussions there as well. So let's set up a collective. Conveniently, I do have this Pi SRV 02 here, and I've pre-installed the same version of Data Archive on here. At least I thought I did. Looks like I may have forgotten to do that. All right. We can install Data Archive on here and wait for it to install while we move Asset Framework off to a new machine. So let's just go ahead and do that. In the meantime, keep questions coming. I'm just going to initiate this install and then move over and do the Asset Framework stuff. So we're just installing Data Archive. This has the same directory setup as our other machine. We're doing E drive on F drive. At least I think it was E and F. Yep. Okay. Oh. That should have been E drive as well. And F drive is here. Yeah. F, F, and E. We're all happy. Okay. So while that's installing, let's talk about Asset Framework. Pi AF is going to be our Asset Framework machine. We're going to install an Asset Framework server on here. Well, before we do, we need to tell our SQL server, just like before, so into local users and groups in our SQL server, into the AF servers group, we are going to add in, well, now it's got Pi SRV in there. Now we're going to add in Pi AF. The machine account. All right. And now we're going to install AF on here and point it at the same SQL database. So in this one, we're just installing Asset Framework Server and Analysis Service, and yeah, Notification Service. Let's go nuts. Individual features. We're actually going to install RTQP now because it's not on the same machine anymore. We may as well install it, and we've got enough specs to support it. Okay, sounds good. Before we install RTQP, we really should have a certificate. We don't want to install RTQP or real-time query processing engine with a self-signed certificate, which is what it'll use. I'm just going to go grab a certificate now. I don't think I went through this in the administration courses, but this is really how you would do it. Or really, you would ask your IT department and they'd give you a certificate. But instead of giving you a certificate, they may just allow this machine to request its own certificate. If they do that, before you install, you'll need to go to the certificate store on this machine and request one. So I'm going to open Microsoft Management Console, add in the certificate for the computer account. Okay, and then in personal certificates, I see I've got nothing in here. I'm going to request a new certificate. And it says I'm allowed to request a web server type certificate. Your IT department will need to say that this machine can request a web server certificate before you're able to do this. I'm going to give it some more information. I want this certificate to be for PyAF as its common name. And it's always best practice to do a few subject alternative names for the full qualified domain name as well. Okay. All right, we have our official certificate. All right. Now we can go through our install. We do not want to run the scripts. Our SQL database is on PySQL. In our setup, the SMTP server, so this is for notification setup. You need an email server to use. There's actually an email server installed on PySQL in our environment here, and needs a from email. That'll do. May as well put our Vision URL in as well. That was PyWeb. PyVision. So here it's setting up the real-time query processing engine. It wants a SSL certificate. We just generated that. I'm going to select it here. There we go. That's the certificate we generated. There is only one on the machine, so it gave us that option. Generated by our domain controller. Okay. That'll be happy. I'm going to select the default services here. Generally, best practice is to use actual service accounts and set up permissions for them. I've been using machine accounts this whole time, really to sort of simplify the setup. I wanted to fit this into 2 hours. That was really the only reason to do it, or the only way to do it, but we're going to accept defaults here. Okay. So Asset Framework is going to be installed on here. Back to PySRV02, we've installed Data Archive. So what have we done now? Data archives installed on Pi SIV02. Asset framework is installed on Pi AF. And we've told it that its backend database is Pi FD. So right now we actually we still have Pi AF. Well, we still have an AF installation on Pi SIV up here. So we have two AF servers, both connecting to the same Pi FD. This is actually fine. It's the same way you set up redundant AF servers anyway. So we're fine with this. And all we'll do is just remove the old one on Pi SIV afterwards. Anyway, Pi SIV 02 is installed. Now we're going to set up these to be in a collective. So set up the collective synchronization between. We do that from Pi SIV 01, which is now called Pi SIV. And through the collective manager. We're making first we need to set up a new connection. We need to tell this Pi SIV 01 about Pi SIV 02. So we're going to add Pi SIV 02. It actually won't let us in right now. We go OK, it doesn't work. We need to configure security to let our account into Pi SIV 02. We'll do that first. And then set up this collective. Okay, and security. We'll make a mapping for our account. Just the account that I'm logged in as. And we'll map it over to be an administrator. Really doesn't matter too much. This is going to be wiped anyway, once the configuration gets copied over from Pi SIV. So there we go. Now we should be able to connect. Okay. And we'll set up our collective now. So we're going to create a new collective. We definitely verified our backups are valid because we just restored them. And I like my configuration. Server that will be the primary is an existing server. The collective primary is going to be Pi SRV, which is this machine. And the secondary is going to be Pi SRV02. And we're copying over all of our archives. And we're happy. Okay. So that'll set up as a secondary server. Once that's set up, our interfaces by magic, well, not magic, but our interfaces will start pushing data to both the primary and the secondary, and Pi Vision will suddenly recognize that, oh, there is a secondary that exists now, so if the primary is out, I'll go to the secondary for data. It'll be happy. So what about our asset framework server? It's still starting. A collector was created. Let's take a look at what our interfaces are doing. The global buffering status, this will be like that because PSRV02 is out. It'll come back very soon. So our interfaces, we didn't need to do any configuration on our interfaces. They just suddenly realized that this was a collective now. So they started pushing data out to both. That'll come back very shortly. Okay. Asset framework is installed. We're going to close that. And we're going to open up Pi System Explorer on this asset framework machine, this Pi AF. So right now, we're opening Pi System Explorer on Pi AF itself. When we do this, it's going to connect locally and then give us some information. Well, it's connected locally. It's just worked instantly. It says that this AF server is called Pi SRV. And it's got our same databases as before. So right now, we have effectively two endpoints that users can connect to for AF. Pi SRV has AF on it. And Pi AF also has AF on it. I did install the analysis engine. I probably should have stopped the analysis engine up on Pi SRV because we'd be getting duplicate data now, but oh well. I'm going to go ahead and do that very soon. But right now, our vision only looks at Pi SRV for its asset framework. We need to tell it to look at the new one. Now, this is the fiddly bit of moving asset framework machines. This is something that you need to change on every user machine. If we look at Pi Web here, well, let's just run an experiment here on Pi SRV01, which is Pi SRV. I'm going to get rid of asset framework from here. So I'll just use the installer and I'll modify it and remove asset framework. We're going to modify. We're going to remove AF and analysis. Okay. So as soon as it stops asset framework service here, our user using our browser, I'm going to refresh this because this actually points at asset framework objects. It says no data because it can't connect to asset framework anymore, and it's getting an error unable to connect to Pi System. This is because Pi Vision only knows about this asset framework, which we just removed. Now Pi Vision doesn't know where to go. We need to tell it that, oh, AF is now over here. So we can do that through Pi System Explorer. So I'm on the Pi Vision server itself. You'll need to do this on the Pi Vision server itself and any user machine that uses any locally running Pi System products like Datalink or really, Datalink is the only one left. Unless I'm forgetting something. Someone can write something in the chat. So if they're using Datalink, that you'll need to make sure they know about the new Asset Framework Server 2. We're going to use Pi System Explorer to set this up manually, but there is a registry, well, not a registry key, there is a file you can push out to users. You can get your IT department to push out to users, which sets up their Asset Framework Server configuration automatically. There's reference to an article down below that does this. Okay, so it says it can't connect to AF. It's fine. It's looking at the wrong machine. So we're going to select and tell it that this machine now exists somewhere else. So Pi SRV, I'm going to go into, let me show list, go into properties. So the host is looking at for Pi SRV. I'm going to change this to Pi AF. And then connect. Okay. It says Pi AF calls itself Pi SRV. That's fine. Okay. And that's it. So we still have an AF server called Pi SRV, but the host has changed. That means that all the displays that everyone's built in the past will still work, which is great. It's still looking at the same named Asset Framework Server, but the host has just moved. Okay. So if we close that, we refresh the page, and all our users' displays, well, we may need to restart some things. Hang on. Our users' displays should work again. Maybe I need to connect again. We'll see. Okay, we should be happy. It may need a restart of Vision. That'll do it. Hit it with a hammer. And once that comes up, back up, we should be running again. So we'll probably end the stream soon. Any last questions, feel free to post them through. Hey, look at that. I never doubted myself for a second. Okay. This is our architecture now. We moved Asset Framework to another machine. We told Pi Vision about the move. We haven't told all of our users yet. To tell them all, effectively, we'd need to, I'll just go find the file. We'd need to push out this file. So in this folder on the machine, there is afsdk.config that holds the known servers table information for Asset Framework. So we need to push out, well, that we've configured this one. This is what gets configured when we were messing around with Pi System Explorer. I'll just open this up with Notepad. We can check out what's inside. So it says the AF servers that I know about on this machine. There is an AF server called Pi SRV. That's its ID, and its host is Pi AF. So we need to make up a file like this. So a file like this one, and then push it out to this directory for all of our users that need to connect. If we wanted to move our AF server from one host to another and have all users know about it. Right. There's a couple of other odds and ends after we've moved our machines around. Kerberos delegation on our Vision server is actually broken right now. We don't know that it's broken because we're logged on to the server itself and opened up a web page. If we opened up a web page from another machine, it would actually be broken. Setting up Kerberos delegation, we'd have to go through the Pi Vision setup manual again and set up that part. We need to do this because we moved all servers around. Pi Vision needs to be explicitly, well, the domain needs to be told that the Pi Vision server is allowed to authenticate users to Asset Framework and Pi Data Archive. So right now, when Pi Vision connects to Data Archive or to AF, it is not allowed to impersonate our users because we had it set up before on the old machines, but now both of these machines have changed, so it's gonna fail. We can quickly do that. I'll just quickly do that on our domain controller. We do that in Active Directory users and computers. So we're looking for PiWeb. Our Vision is actually running under the, it's set up so it's running under the computer account, or at least it's delegating with the computer account. There are quite a few ways you can set this up. Look at the Pi Vision documentation for the different ways you can set it up. But I'm going to fix it up. We're going to go into Properties and Delegation. And looks like trust this computer for delegation. It's looking at PySRV01, PySRV.PyScore.int for AF server and Pi server. This account's actually changed. I'm not sure if it's broken or not. I'm going to set it up again from scratch. Okay. So we just set it up to go to PySRV for its Pi server. We just set it up so it's allowed to go to PySRV02 for its Pi server. And set it up so it's allowed to go to PyAF for its AF server. Okay. Should be happy with that. Okay. Now it'll be fixed again. All right. So this is what we ended up with today. I did it in under 2 hours. I may have gone a little quickly. Really sorry if I went too quick for everyone to keep up. But effectively what we did today is we backed up our system, and then we had a disaster. Our Pi Data Archive went out and we recovered. In the future, with our architecture as it is right now, if our Pi Data Archive went down, we'd actually be pretty okay. We'd still have PySRV02 and we'd still have PyAF. Really, the biggest point of failure we have here is PyAF now. We could set that up to be in a a redundant pair of asset framework servers. If you want to know how to do that, we actually do that in the Administration Beyond the Basics class. So really in this session, we covered recovering from a backup and also moving asset framework servers, a little bit on known servers tables and setting those up. So I want to thank you for attending. And if there's any further questions, please don't hesitate to use the comments below. Thanks very much.